Hi.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's 2 o'clock. Good time to start our meeting. Welcome, everyone, and welcome to this special meeting and workshop of the Oak Harbor City Council. Mayor Bob Severance cannot be with us this afternoon. So let's start by introducing ourselves. I'll go ahead, start, and go to my left. I'm Danny Pagao, Mayor Pro Tem.
Tara Heisen, City Council.
Rick Almberg, City Council.
Doug Merriman, City Administrator.
Joe Stowell, City Engineer.
Erica Wassinger, City Council.
And also outside the table, start with our Public Works Director.
Lee Rosen, Public Works Director.
Steve Powers, Director of Development Services.
Ray Merrill, Fire Chief.
Cat Comack, Senior Planner.
Brett Arvidsson, Public Works.
Ray Lindenberg, Associate Planner.
Thank you, everyone. And now, first, before we start, please note that the council will be taking action on sections 1 and 2 of our agenda bill. We'll go ahead and start with the consent agenda items from the council. Any changes, any item you need to remove, any item? Go ahead.
Does this require a motion to accept this agenda since we are taking action on some items?
It is still in our council rules, but it's not necessary to make a motion. If everybody agrees and don't want to remove any item, we'll consider it adopted. The consent agenda items are adopted. Item number 2. Approval of agreement with Bridge Masters Incorporated for Deception Pass Waterline Bridge Hangers Replacement. Mr. Stowell.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. Jim will be pulling up a quick slideshow here in just a moment. We've talked about this project for a little while now. If you remember, we have all of our water service for Oak Harbor comes, we purchase wholesale from the city of Anacortes, and it's piped from their treatment plant on the Skagit River all the way down to Sharp's Corner and across the Deception Pass Bridge into Oak Harbor. Back in March of 2015, council authorized a contract with Grant Osborn to inspect the water mains and their hangars on the Deception and Canoe Pass bridges. That was, we had a concerned citizen that pointed out a couple of hangars that were suspect, and we got to talking with WashDOT, and we're able to coordinate our inspection of the water main along with their regularly scheduled bridge inspection and cleaning that they do every other year. So through that, you see there was another amendment to that contract on April 7th because the means and methods of that inspection changed. We thought we were going to be using a U-bed truck, which are the ones that crane around, and we ended up using one that's a platform, and it was a little bit slower process, so that adjusted the scope of work with Grant Osborn. And then in December, we authorized Grant Osborn to proceed with design of the bridge hangars. We did solicit engineering firms other than Grant Osborn to perform that work. Grant Osborn was selected as the most qualified, and that's who we contracted with to do the work, to prepare the plans. And in June of this year, we authorized, council authorized us to go out to bid for that work. So what is the work? Quite simply, it's replacing 165 of the bridge hangers on both of those bridges. We're going to just take the pipe and slightly move it over onto new hangers. And it also, we're going to replace 1,400 feet of insulation that's around that pipe. It has an aluminum shielded insulation on there now, and moving everything over is going to damage that to enough of a degree that we feel it's good to replace it. And it also includes traffic control, and that's important to mention because we are going to be starting work on September 12th, and it's going to go for about 6 weeks. And from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning, it's going to be down to one lane on the bridge, so overnight. And we're going to go through a whole process of reaching out to the public through, there is an existing stakeholders email group that was developed when they did the paving of the Deception Pass Bridge. So we tapped into that and sent that out so the other local agencies around us are aware. We clearly had to get a permit from WashDOT, so they're clued in, and we'll get it on their web page. And we have a couple other ways of getting information out to the public that will be doing this work. And if anybody's watching from home and has questions, they feel free to call me. I'm Joe Stowell, the number at the bottom there, or email. And Arnie's on vacation the rest of this week, but he'll be back first thing next week if you have more specific questions about the project. And with that, I noticed when I looked at the agenda bill in the packet that we got things kind of backwards because they changed the order for us a little bit. So the recommended action used to be at the end, now it's at the front, and I see that we've written it in as the purpose. So, and we left out a recommended action. So I took the liberty of drafting one up and putting it on the overhead rather than resubmitting the agenda bill. And it's roughly 5% set aside for my authority for any changes that might occur during the process. Anything more than that, we'd come back to council for approval. Are there any
Thank you,
questions?
Mr. Sala. Any questions from the council? Seeing none.
Do we need two separate motions?
Go ahead, Ms. Hanson.
Do we need two separate motions?
Yes, I think we need separate motion on
I have
this.
one question before we
Right,
make a motion.
Dr. Merriman, do we need separate motion?
It might be best to take two separate motions on that.
Thank
Mayor
you.
Pro Tem, I have a question before we.
Sure.
Question for you. Is any of this prorated to the Navy? Since we provide the Navy, how do we work this cost into our rate with the Navy?
Doug, would you like to help me with that one?
The Navy pays, when this goes into our O&M, that O&M calculation goes into the Navy's rate calculation. So it flows through when we do the calculation based on that.
So when we do the next rate calculation for that, when?
The Navy's is automatic. It goes on a month-to-month basis.
Month to month?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So, thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? I'll entertain a motion. Ms. Hanson?
I move to approve the first recommended action as proposed. Second. We're trying to be more specific.
Moved by Ms. Hanson, seconded by Ms. Wassinger, to authorize the mayor to sign a contract with Bridge Masters Incorporated in the amount of $685,617.59, which includes Washington State sales tax. Any discussion? Go ahead, Ms. Hanson.
No, sorry, we have to vote first. I'm jumping the
Okay.
gun.
No discussion? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion passed. Now for the second one.
Question here again.
Go ahead, Ms. Humphrey.
You did not declare that you were voting in this to have a quorum. It takes the four of us in here.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
We need 4. I voted yes. But I get a call. Now for the second item. Thank you. Ms. Hanson.
I move to approve the second recommended action as proposed. Second.
Moved by Ms. Hanson, seconded by Ms. Wassinger, to authorize the city engineer to administratively approve changes to the construction contract totaling not more than $30,000. Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Dr.
And make one comment here. I have to go back and correct something I said to Mr. Almberg real quick. I was thinking the methodology we use for the sewage plant out of the lagoons, where we run our capital projects through like that. But this one, we would have to contact the Navy and talk to them about the actual costs on the project and look for reimbursement that way, if it qualifies for that.
Is there a formula for allocating that, like on a percentage basis?
there is percentage, we've done that before, like on waterline moves out by the shrimp shack.
Yeah.
And we also have like capital maintenance fund and some different things like that. So there's a multi-step piece to that.
So will the staff get back to us just to
Sure.
answer that question?
We can let you know what
Okay.
that is.
Thanks.
Yeah, my apologies for going the wrong direction.
Thank you. The next one is item 2B, approval of the non-commissioned CBA for the Oak Harbor Police Department. Dr. Merriman.
Thank you, Council, for this item. This is the proposed settlement agreement for our non-commissioned police department bargaining unit. This agreement has been in process being negotiated for a few years, dating back to 2013. There have been a lot of different, as you can tell, looking at the agenda bill, a lot of different housekeeping items to go through to clean up the contract. The main ones that really we would look at would be the cost of living adjustments. And on the agenda bill, we have listed those out. As you can see, 2013 was 0. This was agreed upon by the bargaining unit. This was similar to what other employees got at that time in 2013. From there going forward, we were looking at 14, 15, and 16. You can see the percentage rates of 2%, 2%, and 2.5%. Right near the end of the contract, we did add an additional year. Otherwise, we would be voting on this, hopefully approving it, and then we'd be right back in the negotiations again. So we did throw out the ability to add a year to the contract, and they agreed to that. So we did extend it one additional year. That gives us a year to kind of step away from the table, take a breather, and then we'll come back again sometime next year to look at that. So those are the cost of living adjustments, an extension on the agreement, a couple other items, medical insurance. As you remember, most of the city staff, we changed our medical plan a couple of years ago. We did have to negotiate that change with our bargaining units, and they have agreed to retain the more expensive plan that they've had in the past, but they will be paying the difference between what the city's normal plan is today and what it costs for that additional plan. And they've agreed to do that in their agreement. It's been negotiated. And really the last item that's a standout is in the longevity section. Longevity is when they've worked a certain number of years, they get a bit of a premium for pay. It's an incentive to keep officers and our non-commissioned staff here. And what we did is it previously only had a 15 and 20 year level that you would get to before you get longevity. And looking at our comparable cities, nearly all of them had a 10-year benchmark in there as well. So we did add in that 10-year mark to give us 3 different levels of our longevity steps now. And primarily the rest of it, as you saw in the agenda bill, is all housekeeping. There's a lot of different things just updating the current law or actually moving one paragraph to a different section in the agreement to make it flow a little better. So our staff recommendation to City Council is to approve the agreement and authorize the mayor to sign.
Thank you, Dr. Merriman. Any discussion, question from the council? Mr. Albert?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Dr. Merriman, what is the name or the acronym for the state rate adjustment for uniform personnel, like police and fire?
Make sure we're talking about the same thing. When it comes to cost of living adjustments, it's not an index. Like,
Isn't there an index
there's
that?
a CPIW that is out there we use a lot of times for non-represented staff. And that's a consumer price index, and the W is wage earners and clerical workers, is what that W stands for. But when it comes to interest-based units like fire, police, jailers, and that, they're on a different method where what you do is you agree on a list of comparable cities, and you compare your salaries to what those cities are, and typically there's an agreement that you'll be at the midpoint of those averages. So there's not something we go to as a manual or an index that we match these to. It's based on what comparable cities we've used, based on their population, revenue producing capacity, things like that. And then we negotiate to some point of the average of those comparables.
Isn't there a standard rate that goes into effect each year for uniformed personnel, which is different from non-uniformed personnel, that's driven by state RCW?
No.
No?
Nope.
This is the only increase?
This is the way to
This
do
one
it.
right here, okay.
Yeah. You'll see a cost of living adjustment. There is one housekeeping one in here. There was one position that was so far behind the comparables, we're doing a small market adjustment in addition to the COLAs. And that's because what you're using as that benchmark is the average of your comparable salaries for similar positions. But there is no statutory index or anything to be used for salary increases.
Thank you, Mr. Albert. Any further discussion, question? I have one, Dr. Merriman, on the longevity percentages was based on the 10, 15, and 20 years of service. Prior to 10 years of service, the longevity increases based on certain amount, not percentages.
Yeah, prior to someone working in the unit less than 10 years, there is no longevity at that point. So you have to reach the 10-year mark before that comes in. The incentive is to have staff members or employees work longer. So you put that longevity increase or premium somewhere out down the road, so they will want to be incented to work that long. So accordingly, there's no longevity incentive for those first few years.
Good to know. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any further question? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion for this item. Mr. Albert?
Well, I guess I'll have to craft this motion here too. I move that we approve the labor agreement between the City of Oak Harbor and the Oak Harbor Police Association non-commissioned unit for, as presented.
And authorize the mayor to sign.
And authorize the mayor to sign the agreement.
Moved by Mr. Arnberg, seconded by Ms. Heisen, to authorize the mayor to sign the labor agreement by and between the City of Oak Harbor and the Oak Harbor Police Association non-commissioned unit for the city. Okay, let's stop right there. Non-commissioned unit. Any further discussion? Seeing none, those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed say no. Motion passed. Thank you. Now we go to the departmental briefings, starting with request for proposal for non-represented class and comprehensive study. Human resources.
Hi, I'm a house HR director, and
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah, Michael, you can come
sit
in.
here?
We look mean, but we're not really mean.
Yes, thank you.
so we have released the RFP for our non-represented class and comp study, and the plan is to accept proposals by September 12th. And then we will be bringing it back, I believe, to the October 4th meeting. Let me just make sure that's the right date. To finalize the agreement from those proposals, and we're hoping to be done with the entire study by the end of the year.
Any questions from the council? Discussion? Ms. Heisen?
When's the last time we did a comp study? I feel like it was pretty recently. Was it last year or the year before?
My understanding was that we haven't done one for the non-represented class and comp for many years.
Okay,
outside.
just the non-represented.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we've been doing internal
Mhm.
studies, but we haven't gone outside. And so we are doing that now.
Mr. Humbert?
Are we going with outside consultant to do this
Yes.
study? Who is that consultant? Have we already agreed on it?
That's the RFP for this, is to make
Oh,
that.
okay, so
Yeah.
this is an RFP.
Right. So by October 4th, we should know.
Jumping ahead.
Any further question? I think during the introduction, we missed you back there. Could you introduce yourself? Or
My name is Emma
Resource
House, and I'm the Human Resources Director.
Director? Thank you.
Thank you.
Edna? Thank you. Item number 4, pending agenda items, starting with deadline for filing a final plat and vesting periods for final plats. From Development Services, Mr. Kakama.
Some handouts. Thanks, Steve. So this is to just, while the handouts are coming around, this is to brief the City Council on some text amendments that are being brought forward. These code amendments are related to filing of plats and their validity for how long they're valid since they're approved and how long before you can do construction. So there were some, during the downturn in the economy in between 2008, 2011, that time frame, the state legislature decided to extend the times for which plats can be valid. And they did a series of amendments, and actually I do have a presentation which will help me kind of track my thoughts a little better. So RCW 58-17-140 sets the time for which plats are valid, final plats and preliminary plats are valid. And that time period is set at 5 years. It's just a kind of a good rate to kind of have these plats valid and move the economy along. In the downturn, things slowed down a little bit, and some of these plats were starting to expire. So the state extended some of these extensions. They did a change in 2010. They did a change in 2012, and then they did another change in 2013. Now that the dust has settled, we can kind of take those changes and adopt them into our code. The filing periods changed. Originally there were 7, they changed them to 9, and then they eventually settled on 10 years. The timing of these, the validity of these plats is dependent on when a plat is approved, and they threw those dates on there, and I'll go over that information here in a little bit. The time periods also changes a little bit whether that plat is in a shoreline jurisdiction or not, because the shoreline master program is an additional layer of review that goes on these plats, and so that was kind of changed as well. And they also changed the vesting period for land uses after a final plat is approved. So those are some of the things that these House bills addressed. In order for us to understand or incorporate these changes into our code, I think it's important to understand how the platting process generally works, because once we know that, a code is written in such a way based on the kind of process, and so we know best where to make the amendments. So the process, how it works is we get a preliminary plat application, we do an internal review, and we route it around, and then we take it to public hearing in front of the Planning Commission and the City Council, and then the City Council and the Planning Commission approve the preliminary plat. Once the preliminary plat is approved, there's 2 ways that a developer can go to final plat. One of the process involves just going to civil plans. So soon after they do the preliminary plat, they go to civil plans, they start to do the construction once that's approved, and then we do the final inspection, and once we've kind of cleared them for all the construction details and requirements, they then file a final plat application. Now, and then that goes to City Council for approval. So the time period between when the preliminary plat was approved, all that construction and all the plans were done till the final plat approval, that's the period, the extension time, or the validity of the plat we're talking about, which is being extended. So that that's one part of the process. The second way somebody could do a final plat is, as soon as the preliminary plat is approved, they can post a bond for all the improvements without doing any of the construction, and then they can go and do the final plat, and they can start, and after approval, they can start selling lots, and usually with that income, they start to build the infrastructure. Now, this process is not normally done in Oak Harbor. There are other communities that do it, but I just wanted to point that out just in case somebody in the future does that. But anyway, the time limit then would apply to that portion of it. How soon can they come in and get that final plat approved? And then, once the final plat's approved, they do the civil plans, construction. So some of the activity that was done in the other step before comes after. And that kind of is where some of the vesting period applies. So once a final plat is approved, the legislature has put into place some extensions for how long that final plat and the uses that were planned for those lots are valid. And so that kind of addresses the vesting period for some of that. So, so the language that applies to these, goes back to preliminary plat and how long that's approved, that's valid, and then how long is the vesting period for final plats. And the language is up there, and I know it's really tiny and you can't read them, so I did make them into another slide. So the summary of all the changes that they did was basically, if a preliminary plat was approved before January 1, 2008, and it's not within a shoreline jurisdiction, you have 10 years of validity of that plat. And if it was approved before January 1st of 2015, and it includes all the plats before 2008, but if they're within an SMA jurisdiction, a shoreline jurisdiction, then that period is only 7 years. And then anything that's approved after January 1, 2015, which is last year, we're kind of back into a regular economy, so the timeline is going back to 5 years. So that's kind of the change, and it's similar for final plat. The vesting periods follow some of the same timeline. So where in our code can we change to adopt these rule changes is in 2 sections in our Oak Harbor Municipal Code. And the handout that I have has the kind of draft ordinance behind the agenda bill that kind of has the amended language that staff is recommending in order to consider these changes. So one section is the preliminary plat, 212080, which is the effective approval. And the way the language is written in our code talks about how long is a preliminary plat construction time valid, basically. And so we've kind of like amended the language to reflect the 10-year and the 7-year changes based on how long the construction period is valid for a preliminary plat. The second section, final plat 214020, is a section that kind of deals with final plat, its vesting period, its extensions. So we've thrown in the language on how long a final plat is valid based on the changes into that section of the code. So we've also made reference to RCWs on the vesting rights, so that if it does change in the future, we're covered. We don't have to keep doing these amendments. So so that's what the draft language in the handout is. So these 2 sections should cover the changes done by the state legislature. So that will allow some of the subdivisions in the city. There's not many. I want to say 1 or 2 plats, and keeps them valid and keeps them moving forward. So this amendment will just bring our code up to the state regulations and changes. So, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Council. Any questions from the council? Ms. Hyson?
I have several questions, bear with me.
Okay.
Just to clarify, for my own benefit, the difference between the preliminary plat that's approved and the final approval is the construction. Is that, so we approve the preliminary plat and then they actually build something and then we do the final approval?
Yes, that's how it's been done here in Oak Harbor.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other main difference is that the preliminary, key to this conversation is the preliminary approval does not legally create any lots. So it defines where those lots are going to be and the boundaries and the streets and all of those things, but the lots are not legally created until such time as the final plat is recorded at the county.
Okay. Good. And this might be in here, and I apologize if you have to repeat yourself, but if someone receives preliminary approval and the city code changes in the 5 to 10 years, are they grandfathered in because they've been approved prior?
Yes, The vesting period for preliminary plats they are vested when the application is deemed complete.
Okay.
So it's not the approval, it's actually under what conditions you review the plat, which makes complete sense, so.
Yeah, I mean, if someone went through the process, then had to do it
And
again,
then
then
had
it
to-
would
yeah,
defeat the
absolutely.
purpose. Okay. Would an example of this be, maybe it's not, the lot on Swantown? It was the old trailer park and someone wanted to develop it and then the recession hit and they kind of needed to hit the pause button on that and we said, okay, yeah, just clean it up and you can have some extra time. Is that an example of something like this or is that apples and oranges?
I am not sure if they did a plat, but they should do it.
It's similar, but that one was under a site plan as opposed
Okay.
to a plat. So they weren't creating individual lots
Okay, they
because they were
weren't
going to
doing
build either apartments or condos depending upon
Okay.
the where they were in the market. But so that's a little bit different, but it's similar in that original approval was good for a certain period of time. And we came back to the council at their request to extend the life of that site plan for an additional year or 2 years, I don't remember which one it was. Ultimately, they ended up not pursuing the project, but it's the same kind of thing,
Okay. That
but
makes
not covered
sense.
by this code.
Okay, I couldn't remember what it was they intended to do with the property, so that makes sense. And that is all my questions, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Ms. Reisinger.
Along Tara's point, I know a few council meetings back, we approved an extension for the development of Scenic Heights. So is that in line with this? So we just sort of, because this wasn't in our code, we had to sort of make an
Yeah, I
exception
think that
for
action was an extension for the final plan.
It was an extension, but that was a great example of where what we were really doing was relying on the language in the state law.
Okay,
Because the state
instead
law
of-
for that particular one gave it 10 years
Okay.
of life, if you want to think of it that way.
Okay.
And so we acknowledged that the state law applied in that instance and then applied our local code to grant them the year extension on that 10-year
Okay.
time limit.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then one more.
Yeah, sure.
So, so in a sense, this could backtrack. So if we had, and I wasn't around, let's say before December 31st, say it was December 1st, 2014, if we had a preliminary plat, it would now apply to be the 7 years.
That's correct. It's
No.
before the 2015
Yeah,
date. and
okay, so it just sort of backtracks to
Right.
go back for all those that we maybe
Absolutely. Yeah.
preliminary plats that we approved.
From a practical perspective, I think
Okay.
there is, well, I know of one plat that's certainly inside of the 5-year time limit. The other plat that comes to mind is at a final plat stage, so it's no longer just a preliminary plat, but it's an unbuilt final plat, and it would fall inside of one of these timelines in terms of still being alive, for lack of a better word.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reisinger. Ms. Downford.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Kat, could you go back to the timeline graph that you had up there for a sec? Okay, we're going through the preliminary application process. I don't recall, do we have, as a city, have a timeline obligation to respond to the applicant with a timeline like we do with site plan?
Yes, state law says that at 90 days.
90 days, okay. So then we get down through that process, which includes the 90 days or before the public hearing?
The 90 days starts at the time that we deem it to be a complete application.
Right,
So notice of complete application.
right?
And then that's when the 90-day clock starts. And that 90 days is actually very short because it includes the council approval. What it excludes is time where the city is waiting for the applicant
Right.
to do something. So
Okay.
it's like the old clock for chess match, right? We hit it, it's on our time, we stop it, that's their
Okay,
time.
I just wanted to confirm that that applied to this process.
It
So
does.
now we get to the approval process. Now we're going, either moving into civil plans and construction, or we're going to divert to a bond, which most people, I think, immediately bond after preliminary plat approval?
They don't.
Is that right?
Not here.
Huh.
We don't see much of that here. CAC was correct.
Okay.
What we will see is at the very end of that civil construction phase, maybe a posting of a small performance bond in order to allow them to do the final plat. So the final plat gets in the queue and we're working on it while they're still trying to complete grouting catch basins and all that.
Okay,
stuff.
but let's go to the next step through there. Okay, post a bond, you have preliminary plat approval, you have drawings, civil drawings, this is what we've agreed to, the city has agreed to, engineering has gone through it, but they haven't started any dirt work yet. But they can also go ahead and plat those lots and record them because a bond is posted for the value of completion of that work, correct?
Yes. But Oak Harbor being somewhat of a frugal community, we don't see that approach taken very often, if at all.
But it's elective though
It's
on
possible,
the applicant?
yes.
Okay, so then what I wanted to know, once they have filed the plat, they haven't built anything, haven't dug dirt, hasn't even cleaned the site, cleared the site, but the plat is recorded. It's recorded in perpetuity. Is there a timeline when it has to be completed?
The construction?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the vesting period. And
that's the 5 years.
and it depends, again, when that final plat, but normally that's 5 years.
5 years from final plat.
From final plat.
Recording, I've bonded, I'm recording, now I've got 5 years to do something.
Yeah.
Okay, that's, answers my question.
And they're vested in those particular standards, because then after that 5 years, if the standards change.
I haven't
then-
read your draft here. There's a process in here for time extensions too, is that correct?
Yes.
Is that 2-year time extension?
I think it's
or
1 year.
It's 1 year.
Council approval
Yeah.
extensions.
Okay.
CAC, do you want to mention Planning Commission from last night?
Yes, so we did take this to the Planning Commission last night and shared this information with them. We've done that in a couple of meetings. They held a public hearing. There was actually Brian Gentry from Landed Gentry was there and made a comment during the public comment period, so they've taken some input on that, and they're forwarding it to the City Council for recommendation for approval. So, yeah.
Any further questions? On the posting of the bond before the final plat application, what is the purpose of the posting of the bond? Could you tell us again?
If they don't do any construction at all, so if they go from preliminary plat to final plat, they have to bond for pretty much all the improvements that they are going to do. And it's usually a pretty big amount, and that's one of the reasons we don't see that process used here. They'd rather just do the construction, and then if they had to carry a bond at the very end, let's say for landscaping or something, and the season wasn't right, they probably will do that, and that's a smaller amount to carry. But posting a bond soon after, especially if the subdivision is 30 or 40 lots, then it's a substantial amount for them to post the bond on. So we don't see that done much in Oak Harbor, but they do have the option. They have to post for the entire construction, and I think maybe time and a half or something. There's some bond requirements and how much they have to post.
It's 150% of the cost of the public improvements. And so really, Mr. Pigal, what it is it's a financial guarantee that all of the public improvements that they've agreed through the preliminary plat process will be built. So the streets, the sidewalks, storm drain, water, sewer. That bond is intended to cover 150% of the estimated cost of those improvements.
So those bonds are used in case the applicant does not perform or
Right.
do the final plat.
In
Who
theory,
will do the improvements?
in theory, the city calls the bond and then compels that the improvements are done. And that's our financial guarantee that work will be completed.
Thank you.
Another question. Steve, I heard you say 150%. Isn't it 115% of the
It's
value?
150% in one category, and it's 112 in another. And at the top of my head, I can't remember which is which.
Okay.
Stromberg.
But it is more than 100%.
It's more than the
Yeah.
it's more than the cost.
Yeah.
The estimated cost. Yes.
Any further questions? If not, thank you, Mr. Cameron. Thank you, Mr. Powers.
Cat.
And
I didn't
again,
get a
for
copy
the
of this.
next item is for B, discussion of model homes, development services.
Mr. Begal, Ray Lindenberg, Associate Planner, will lead the council in this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pro Tem and members of the council. We are working on a potential ordinance to allow for model homes, i.e. those that you walk through before you purchase, to be constructed on properties before they get to that final plat phase. And that's kind of the discussion that we had a few minutes ago. In between the preliminary approval and the final approval, there's still just one official lot. And so typically what we allow for now is one house to be built on one lot. Through some conversations with the development community who've expressed an interest in being able to construct more than one model home, we're going to take a look at changing the ordinance to allow for that. And what we're basing that off of is an ordinance that we found from Mount Vernon that allows for up to 9 homes to be constructed. And that the theory behind that is that would be how many homes you could build with a short plat, or how many lots you could create with a short plat. So if something were to fall through, they could fall back onto a short plat process and still be able to get those legal lots. There are protections built into the code that allow for bonding or securities to be produced so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where something gets halfway constructed and then falls through, what have you. So what this will allow for, as I said, is to have a builder come in, go through the typical preliminary plat process, be able to start construction of their utilities and streets and all that sort of thing, and start construction on some model homes to be able to show to the public. When that is completed, then they can move forward and go through the final plat and everything. But this will allow them to be able to do pre-sales and show potential customers what those houses might look like. So that's pretty much where we're at. This is going to go to Planning Commission. I believe we have it scheduled for end of next month, and then it'll come to you all shortly thereafter. So,
If I may add, the other component to this, which is important for the public side of things, is that all necessary utilities and life safety features would have to be in place. So the fire department would have to have a surface that they can drive on. Obviously, there needs to be fire flow. Stormwater, some level of stormwater improvement needs to be in order to handle these model homes. So there will be, the necessary infrastructure would have to be in place to support the homes. But it would be in advance of the final plat, as Ray has said.
Thank you. Any questions? Comments? Ms. Hayes?
The Mount Vernon ordinance that you mentioned allowed for up to 9 model homes to be constructed. Are we adopting that same number? Are we proposing that same number?
I believe that is the intent at this point, unless there's some concern about that. We can look at other numbers.
The full section of that, I think, is it's 20% of the total number of units up to 9 units. And again, I think Ray is correct that the reason for the 9 is that that's the maximum number of lots under state law that you can create through the short plat process. So there's some logic there that if the long plat or the subdivision process sort of fell apart, there'd be a way to still create legal lots for those homes which are now either under construction or have been completed.
That makes a lot of sense, especially the percentage of proposed lots as opposed to some arbitrary number. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So you have 9 homes. You have you meet the requirements for life safety, all-weather surface for the fire department, all that type of stuff. Will you be able to issue a building permit, or excuse me, an occupancy permit on any of the model homes?
Not until the lots are legally created with the fire
Okay,
plat.
so that's where the bonding comes in. So you can go ahead and bond for the value of the balance of the work to be completed and record your plat, and then you could sell. Then you can sell model homes and then build another home, which becomes the new model home type of thing.
If they chose to do it that
If they
way.
chose to do it that way. Okay?
Thank you, Ms. Albert. Any further question, discussion? If not, we go proceed to the next one. Thank you. Thanks. This will be for Public Works. I can see Public Works Director Kathy Rawson. Park Board recommendation, amend Oak Harbor Municipal Code 6.12.080, sale of alcohol in parks.
Yes,
Mr.
thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council. Currently, our code allows the sale of alcohol in Catalina Park, which is by the marina, and Windjammer Park as part of special events that are approved by City Council. A few months ago, we received a special event application for an event in Flintstone Park where they wanted to sell alcohol and our code wouldn't permit it. So it was discussed at a park board meeting, and the park board wanted to recommend that that council allow the sale of alcohol in association with a special event approved in Flintstone Park. And as staff, we don't see any issue with that because that is not, there are no children's playgrounds, there are no athletic uses for that park. So then the other thing that the park board wanted the council to consider is allowing the sale of beer, wine, and other liquor in other city parks such as Fort Nugent on a case-by-case basis, subject to certain conditions. And the recommended conditions would be that there aren't any youth athletic activities occurring in the park on that day and at that time, and that no sale of alcohol be allowed within 150 feet of a children's playground area. So this will be coming to you at your second meeting in September for a public hearing for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Rossman. I understand Ms. Wassinger is member of the Park Board.
No, no,
Not
sir.
anymore.
Used to be.
No, not anymore. I resigned when I was appointed to city council. Thank you, though. I was a member of the park board when the original code was adopted back for Windjammer and Catalina.
Yes.
But not for this one.
Any questions, discussion, Ms. Heisen?
First I talked to Joel earlier, and he wanted me to voice his support for this. He said it sounded reasonable. That was the word, and I agree. Also, the addition here of other city parks on a case-by-case basis, aren't all of these licenses approved on a case-by-case basis?
Yes, but you wouldn't be allowed, if they're not specifically mentioned in the code, you wouldn't be able to do it unless we changed this language to allow other parks on a
Gotcha.
case-by-case basis.
So, right, you couldn't even apply.
Yeah, you couldn't,
If-
we couldn't even consider the application that came in for Flintstone.
Okay, that's the distinction. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, since every one of these is, reviewed before it's approved, I think this is also reasonable. And I like the addition of some guidelines so that the process doesn't seem arbitrary. So yeah, good job. Look forward to it.
Thank you, Ms. Heisen. Yes, Ms. Wassinger.
I have maybe just more of a comment too. To me, I agree with it too, and it sounds, like something that would be good for our city and events. But my comment, I guess, would be in having to put that. It sounds like a lot more work maybe to throw onto the Parks Department. Just being on the Parks Board in the past and being a part of youth sports, to sort of coordinate that case-by-case basis and figure out if there is going to be a youth activity, especially I could see Fort Nugent, it's so busy out there. It seems, what is the current fee for a permit to pull one of these special, do you know? I don't know it off the
That I
top
don't
of my
know.
head. Is there?
I don't know if it's $25 or $50 to apply.
Yeah,
I
that
think.
sounds.
was
is it
25.
Okay.
50 plus
Okay. I just think, I'm just thinking about that, and to me, it seems like it may be some work for the department, and I would be sensitive, for you guys to take that time to coordinate all of that, just being involved before. So maybe just something to think about.
I think that we can kind of track that for a year's period. Really, most of those special events where you want to have a beer garden or whatever occur down in Windjammer or near the marina.
See how many are pulled for Fort
we need to,
Nugent.
yeah, we need to.
Or
look
one
at
of those
that.
other hotspot areas, like
Yes.
you said, with a lot of the playgrounds and a lot of kids going in and out,
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Rosen. Any further discussion, question? If not, thank you, Ms. Rosen.
Thank you.
Next one is, we get back the development services on Island Regional Transportation Planning Organization, or RTPO. We're getting back, Mr. Khan.
Yeah, this will be talking. So, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So this is kind of, we're going a little back and forth with the RTPO and ITPO. So a couple years ago, Island County was in a joint regional transportation planning organization with Skagit County, and it was called SIRTPO, Skagit and Island County. Skagit County reached some thresholds with Mount Vernon and Burlington growth, and they reached a population number that allowed them to be a separate RTPO. They didn't need to join with Island County. So a couple years ago, they decided to do that on their own, which kind of left Island County by itself. We didn't have quite the number of people, didn't hit the thresholds to be our own RTPO. So we had to form what's called an ITPO, an Island County Transportation Planning Organization. And that was set up, and resolutions and interlocal agreements came through the council for approval, and the council approved it, and a ITPO was formed. But the state legislature in its last session added some amendments that would allow Island County to again be an RTPO. They very specifically designed the population count, and they also kind of added you have to be an island and you have to be served by a ferry or something like that. That kind of put Island County in a unique position to form an RTPO, even though we're less than the 100,000, I think, people threshold. So given the opportunity, the county and jurisdictions would like to go back to an RTPO. It's a better form of kind of a system to look at regional transportation issues, and a better decision-making system than the ITPO. So we are bringing some agreements forward to the City Council. The membership remains the same. Most of the bylaws remain the same. We're just going from an Island County Transportation Planning Organization to a regional transportation planning organization again. And so we're just making the transition, and this will just provide the mayor authorization to sign those documents and enter into that organization. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. So that's what this document is. So,
Good.
any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Any questions?
Just a comment, this comes up Friday on our transit board also.
Oh, good, yeah, because the other member.
I've looked at this, and I think I've read this before.
Yep, we're all just transitioning back again.
The transportation. If no question, thank you, Mr. Kama. Thank you. Proceed to the next one. 4E. This is the GMP number 8, Hoffman Construction. Concrete self-performance number 2. And here comes the city engineer, Mr. Stowe.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I have more copies than I probably need, but feel free to take one and pass it around. So I brought a lot of muscle with me today as I'm getting ready for the presentation. I have Brett Arvidsson here he's the project manager on this, project engineer that's leading up the charge down there at the wastewater treatment plant. I also have Trevor Teese and Brian Shirley from Hoffman here. If you have any questions from the contractor, they've been doing a wonderful job for us. And then I have a few from KBA who's helping us augment our staff down there, and that Kay Adams, Dan Williams, and Chad Oxford. So when we get to the tail end of this, if you guys have any real tough questions, I'm going to hold them up in front of me and see if I can get out of the room before they do. No, just kidding. Got to have some fun with it. So we're getting ready for the next amendment to the contract with Hoffman, GMP number 8. And I'm going to go through, some of this is repetitive, but there's some information nested in there that's important later on to consider. So I'm going to go through, why GCCM, an overview of the GMP, what is heavy civil and why we're using it, and the third-party validation. And I have recommended action on here because I'm getting ready for the next council meeting. So why GCCM? Well, it's, as you know, it's unique. We're able to do construction concurrently with design. We've been using it successfully at this point. We were allowed by the state to do that back in March of 2014. It allowed us to identify risks early in the project. If you remember, when we were doing the shallow excavation early on, that allowed us to do that and identify cultural resources early on. And the selection of the contractor is based on a multitude of things. Hoffman really hit it out of the ballpark. They had a great written proposal. They interviewed the highest score on the interview, and their proposal on the price was actually the best as well. So it was really hard to choose anybody other than them, and they've been wonderful to work with. Something to highlight here is you'll see at the very bottom actual profit to manage the project. So there's a fee component to their managing the project. So it's the actual cost plus a fee, and their bid was 4.28%, and that includes bonds and insurance. So that's roughly 2% of the cost. So their actual fee for managing the project is reasonably low. And I bring that up because I know this is a question we'll hit on later. That's why I kept the slide in here. Yeah, I know. I was fully expecting that. So this is just kind of to show how everything falls into place. You can see we have design occurring at the same time construction is, and we still have more to do, and that's kind of why the arrows stop in the middle. That's leading right up to GMP 8. But the point being is that it's a layer cake that's unique and more complicated than I ever thought it would be, and we've got a wonderful team helping us with it. So GMP 8, just a summary of it, is there's direct costs of $7 million, negotiated support services, and those are things like fencing, Santa huts, extra staff, crane. Yeah, that'll come up again in a minute. Then there's risk contingency, which is required per the alternative delivery method regulations in the RCW. We keep an owner's contingency as well, and the difference between the two, just to highlight it, is risk contingency is if there should be a gap in scope between one subcontractor and another, or there's a change that occurs in the field that we need funding for, and those are all run through KBA and Brett and ultimately me, and we keep a log of those, and some of them are additive, some of them are deductive from the project cost. Right now we're at about a net zero, so we have done a really good job of managing that risk contingency, and we'll continue to do so, but it's nice to have if you have one of those moments that you need to make a dramatic change. If it was that dramatic, of course, we'd be back to council to discuss it with you, but it's there for our use in emergency and risk contingency. So the owner contingency is if we change our mind, if we add something to the project, now we've got funding to be able to do that. If we decide that we want key carded locks, electric key card locks versus regular locks, and we've made that change late in the game, that's really on us. So that's kind of where that comes from. Specified general conditions is that covers the stuff that you would expect on every job site, plus the labor of Hoffman's management team. And then there's the GCCM fee, which we talked about a little bit ago, and that all adds up to about 10.8 million. And then sales tax is thrown on top of that, and we end up with a total GMP of $11.8 million. So what does this GMP include? And I'm going to have a couple graphics here in a minute that better help describe this, but the remaining concrete work for the aeration and membrane buildings that they've started already. And then starting on the headworks, the stuff that's underground in the headworks. And if you're not familiar with headworks, that's where there's a lot of complicated concrete work there. There's 2 sets of screens, a sump with some pumps in it, and a grit removal. It's complicated work. There's also miscellaneous appurtenances that need to be embedded into the concrete, like for the doors and access ways and things that you need to have embedded as you're building it. Crane rental, operator, rigger, and bellman through the 1/15/2018. And that is, I'll go into that more in a minute. That's a substantial amount of the support services. And then it includes support services from Hoffman through the end of the year. So the direct costs, I'm going to break this down a little bit more. That $7 million that was on the slide a few minutes ago, I'm going to break it down into the different components. We have the concrete work and for the membrane and aeration. We have the concrete work for the headworks. We have outfall connection reconciliation. I think I made that bigger sounding than it really is, but the last GMP we included an allowance of a little over $300,000 for connecting the outfall we constructed a while back out into the harbor. It extends that pipe up to the facility, not quite as far as Bayshore. And it's over in the existing pipeline, which is an asbestos binder in it, so there's special consideration with how to deal with that. It's through an archaeological area, so we have to work with that. We have other conflicts, and ultimately this is what I've been talking about when we're going to close down City Beach Street for a better part of a month to construct this all at once to help save a few dollars. And even with that, we had to add more to that contract to be able to do that work. We had originally estimated roughly $300,000, and we had to add another $200,000 onto it after we got bids from subcontractors to do the work. And then there's miscellaneous appurtenances. It's just a handful of little small items that they do add up, but they're all nested in this GMP. So this right here is where I start going off on a sidetrack. This is the negotiated work. We talked about this with the last GMP. So it's not the whole thing. We're not negotiating the entire GMP. It's really just this section of work, which is the concrete work. It's work that Hoffman is currently doing on the deep concrete, and this is the extension of that. And I just broke it down here to the price, so it's about $6.4 million worth of work. So what is heavy civil? It's where we're able to, and typically we bid the work, we're able to negotiate it with Hoffman, and we were very successful, and especially had set a precedence with the last GMP, so the negotiations went real well. And effectively it is actual cost plus fee, and so we pay Hoffman what it costs them plus their management, their GCCM fee for that work. And there's one other factor that I'll get to in a minute. Why use heavy civil? We have greater control of the schedule. Every week we can shave off the schedule, we've talked about how much money we can save. So we're finding on the fly innovative ways to reduce the schedule, and we may not be able to do that if we'd have bid this out. It'll result in fewer change orders. Hoffman's sitting here right with us today and have been involved in the design process, so they're very familiar with the plans, and if there's a change order, it's something none of us expected. Reduction in management costs, because if you went with a if you bid it out, you'd have a subcontractor's management team. We're able to reduce the number of people on the management team. Larger number of knowns versus unknowns in the concrete work. We know how much concrete, we know how much rebar, we can put together a schedule and figure out what manpower is. It's a good candidate for heavy civil. And there's an increased ability to find cost savings. So if we can actually, if we find things along the way, we can find further cost reductions, and we've done that in the past. So this was GMP 7 that we already approved that they're out there building right now. Yeah, so it's the gray box, and you can see around the exterior the sheet piles and the tiebacks. And those sheet piles in this graphic extend down to the full depth. So it's just kind of an X-ray view of what's going on, or what we hope to do on the site. And you can see the crane off in the background. So the perspective-wise, if you could imagine you were hovering above the Woodby Island Bank building, looking towards the crane, or looking towards the existing treatment plant, that's kind of the perspective. This is what it looks like today, or actually yesterday. You can see they're working on pouring concrete on that deep foundation, and they're doing a little checkerboard fashion. And this next GMP is for all the area in the middle. So all the yellowish green color is the roof, and the blue are concrete pours, and we're actually putting dividers between all the aeration tanks and the membrane tanks, and the headworks, which is to the upper left in the dark blue. So we'll be doing all the headworks concrete below grade also. So it's a bit more complicated. Well, I don't know if it's more complicated or not. I'll look to the professionals on that one, but it seems to me like it's a bit more complicated than the work we've been doing to date as far as concrete. And it makes sense to continue with Hoffman to do self-performed. At this point, if we were to bid it and hand it off to somebody else, they'd be taking over somebody else's project, and that there's always an amount of finger pointing and things that just don't quite work out when you do that. So, validation of negotiated work. So how did we make sure that this was reasonable? So we went through a whole series of things. I'm not going to read through the whole slide, but I got another better detailed one coming up. So is Hoffman's fee appropriate? They have a heavy civil fee that's incorporated into the $7 million we were talking about. It's incorporated into it of 8%. It's typical to do this. Other agencies see the same type of thing. Sound Transit and trying to think of UW see the similar type fee for heavy civil work. The city benefits because it's open book. We get to see the information, and any of the cost savings that we find that we're able to wean out of this, we see back because it's not done in a traditional lump sum. It's we pay the cost of work plus the fee. So how did we find out if this was reasonable? Just a quick summary. We looked at jobs in our area. An average of the GCCM fee is 4.85%. I didn't weight it or anything. I just took the low bids from similar jobs and got the percentage off of them. And ours is 4.28, and that includes bonds. Self-performed fee on other jobs in the area averages 6%, is what the award, or the lowest bid was. We didn't have that. In other jobs like Sound Transit, they have an opportunity to say, we want this much work to be self-performed. When we were first starting out, we didn't know how much was going to be self-performed. So we didn't and we were the first out of the blocks to do heavy civil in Washington. So we didn't set aside a dollar amount of work that we expected the contractor to self-perform, so we didn't have an item in there for them to actually bid it. So this is a negotiated fee with Hoffman, and you can see it's in the ballpark. And I'll show you some other slides in a minute that further that. So we talked to OAC, which, if you remember, Dan Chandler with OAC is our advisor for GCCM, and they do a lot of this type of work. And so he pointed us to a reference that's Moss and Adams construction 2015 construction industry report here. And for heavy and highway civil contractors, the regional average is 11.27% for heavy civil fee, and the national average is 9.9. So that tells me that we're in the ballpark. How does WashDOT, and that's the same slide I used for the last presentation for GMP 7. How does WashDOT look at this type of work? You know, I talked with KBA, and they, WashDOT looks at things differently. They have what they call force account, and basically subcontractor markup that's written into WashDOT's manual is 7% for amounts greater than 100,000. So, you know, that's force account to WashDOT is, I guess, akin to self-performed because you're paying them for the actual work that they're doing. So how does this affect the city's cost? How does it benefit us? And I kind of went over this before, but I have kind of a summary here. These are just ballpark numbers. I had some help with these, but I just kind of rounded them off. You know, if this will help us shorten the bidding and project duration. There's greater potential for that, which could be, you know, $250,000 to $500,000 savings on the project or cost reduction. And shared crane savings. So if we had a subcontractor come in order to avoid conflicts or change orders, they'd likely have their own crane set up in combination with our tower crane. Redundancy and a recipe for problems. Management staff is reduced, so we could effectively reduce the management staff by 2. So that is a significant cost savings. The city realizes all the project cost reductions, so if we find a more clever mousetrap, we get to realize those savings. And you know, changes to the scope if we get into this and we come up with that better mousetrap. It's the actual cost plus the fee. I'm sorry, I hope I'm not going on too long, but I'm getting close. So this is a summary of Hoffman's contracts here. And this is without sales tax. We're looking, it would be a sum of about $37.5 million total. And I'll be coming back to City Council on September 6th. I keep getting, because we got so many of these going on. September 6th with this agenda item and the 2 that are following. And at the end of September, we'll be talking again about the next phases of work, which that are out to bid right now, which is the mechanical, electrical, and concrete work that's above ground. And that we hope to be coming to council for award on October 4th. And then in December, end of December, we'll be coming back to council with another GMP for the non-process buildings, so like the admin and maintenance building and other work. And then past that, we'll be coming to council with site restoration and mediation on that, or mitigation on that. And that's the sum of my ranting about GMP 8. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Thank you, Mr. Stoll. Would you introduce, we have representatives from Hoffman and KBA here.
Yeah, if you have any questions, I have Trevor Teese and Brian Shirley with Hoffman. Trevor is the project manager, and Brian is the superintendent on the job. He's the one that makes all the wheels turn. Sometimes he beats on them a few times to get them to turn, but they turn. And in the back we have Kay Adams, which is are you president, owner, vice president of KBA? Aspiring production. Yeah, and the shoulder I cry on from time to time. And I have Dan Williams, who's on site helping. Well, he puts out, I don't know if a few of you get the weekly reports, and make sure that everything's tracked properly and reviews all the pay requests beforehand. And Chad Oxford over there, he's the guy with the eagle eye that's looking at the cost estimate we received from Hoffman to make sure, to validate that it's appropriate. And he's done a great job of helping us make sure we're all on the same page.
Good, thank you. And now for discussion, any question from council? Ms. Wassinger.
Can you remind me what, sorry, I remember us talking about this back with number 7, isn't there a maximum percentage that can be self-performed work?
There is, now you're quizzing me, I believe it's 50%. And we're well under that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was going to be my next question about, what do you project, that will be?
Well, and then there's another
Valid.
caveat that they can bid and perform another 30, but
Okay.
not more than 70 total.
Right.
And the math doesn't work out. I don't know why they did that, but that's why I always get lost in that
We'll
one.
never get 50%.
And you guys, Hoffman is interested in bidding on the next concrete work, but you're gonna put in place actual bid for
It'll
that.
be a lump sum.
Yeah.
The process structures number?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
the,
That's correct.
Yeah, what it really is, it's the blower building, electrical building generation, which is really a slab, and then it's the solids building. It's going to be bid on the 13th of September.
So, just, you hit on a clever point. What I'm hoping all this leads to is, and I mentioned it before, I think, but in the week of September 26th, I'm hoping to have a council workshop with you where we go through the bid results that we'll see, because they're gonna be substantial bids. And at that point, the remaining work that hasn't been bid will just be some architecture, the admin and maintenance buildings, and site work.
It'll be the superstructure for the process building, so masonry, steel,
Right.
everything that gets above ground to the roof, and then the skin.
But by the mid-September, we'll have a lot more information. And the goal is to come back and summarize all that for council and the public, along with soft costs and what that means to the end user, the homeowners.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then a time frame for our 90%, estimates is, are we going to have a big
That's-
presentation for that?
That's the fun part. We're skipping straight to go because there's only 2 months
Oh,
between.
okay.
So we're going straight to bid numbers for you. So
Okay.
we were already, by the time we finished looking at the estimate, we already were ready to put stuff on the street, and rather than convolute the issue, we figured we'd just come to you with actual bid amounts.
Mr. Stone, could you also introduce the city's project engineer?
Oh yeah, Brett Arvidsson, he's
Brett Arvidsson is here.
yeah, you can't say enough about Brett. I think we have a real lucky find there. I don't think he came here looking for a job at a treatment plant, and
Actually, I thought it was a general civil job. I walked in the interview and started asking me questions about GCCM.
yeah, turns out the right guy showed up. So
Very, thank you. Question, Mr. Albert?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Well, we had a fairly extended meeting this morning. Why are you all laughing?
this is where this is where I grab Kay and run.
And there were a couple of questions we had on there about the tax on that crane, the property tax, and a lot of general condition items seem to be blended in the breakdown, and in addition to that, a separate line item for general conditions and equipment, and it said has separate breakdown estimate is attached for the general conditions and equipment. So we don't have that, but within the breakdown that we have in the negotiated services, there's a lot of general condition items mixed in with that. I don't know how, we don't have any way of separating it to say what's general conditions by their definition of negotiated services and which ones are in areas 20 and 30.
I haven't had a chance to go through and review the matrix that was put together at the beginning of the project, but before we even put the project out, for proposals from contractors, we put together a matrix that identified what would be paid for by the owner, what would be specified general condition, what would be negotiated support service.
Trevor and I looked at it.
Did you?
So,
You want to help me answer that
yeah,
one?
what happened was, in our original contract, all these categories were established by matrix. It was one of the attachments to the contract we did in July
Borrow that for a moment if you'd like.
2014. So all the items that you've talked about, for example, are defined. So like insurance, staffing, all those boxes. So we have like 5 pages of definition that we follow as we move through it. So this contract is consistent. Trevor and I did, after we talked this morning, did go through it. I had one scare, but as I was like, yeah, we actually have done it right. So we go through, and this is what's established. It's pretty much following state law.
Trevor, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, there's one thing I want to make sure that Mr. Almberg, when you're looking at the general conditions breakdown, are you looking at those general conditions that are included as part of the Hoffman structure self-perform estimate?
I'll tell you what I'm looking at. I have in here, this is a note that I have in here, and this is for the Hoffman Construction GMP Amendment Number 8, Areas 20 and the remaining 30 for the period of May 31, 2000.
Yes, so you're looking at our summary sheet. I see that.
Okay.
Mhm.
And when I go down through that, I hit some line items in here, for example. Now, these sound like, in my experience, sound like general condition related items.
Okay.
Small tools, 7 months. Forklift, job service pickup, radio extension, additional radios, material basket, Little Ricky.
Little Ricky.
Little Ricky. A tip dumpster, oil, gas, and maintenance, and so those are. And there were some other items. I went down through some of these areas. Temporary road maintenance, temporary base maintenance, first aid station, safety glasses. A lot of these things, in my experience in construction, are related to those general condition items that are not specific to independent tasks on the site. Then,
Understood.
okay, and then I go to, and this is both for zone 20 and 30, line items. It says general conditions and equipment estimate. See separate breakdown and estimate, but it's 157,000 plus. It comes out to about 300,000 total for general conditions for this segment of the work.
Sure.
And there's a gap in the explanation for me.
Understood. So, first of all, I think the matrix will help you out. In the GCCM form of contracting, the competitive part is our fee, and then there's a description on the part of the owner for these are the things we want you to include as part of a lump sum general conditions quotation as part of that selection process.
And
that's the competitive piece.
That's what that 157,000 plus for zone 20 is about?
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Okay, so what we include, if you look at this summary here, what do I have in here for specified general conditions on this particular GMP is we've taken a piece of that. I think our overall proposal for general conditions on this contract, our lump sum general conditions, was $2,007,490. And what we've been doing is, of that lump sum piece, which includes X weeks of staffing for 4 named individuals.
Yes.
Okay, and lump sum general conditions as specified by the matrix. That $2 million was a proposal that we made way back in 2014. As each GMP amendment is provided to you, we're providing a piece of that.
You're allocating.
We're allocating
to that segment.
Now that's
Okay.
just specified GCs. The matrix also goes on to describe what is negotiated support services and why do we have this negotiated support services versus general conditions. Well, in GCCM, you're selecting a contractor before you have a design and total program put together. So there's no fair way to have the contractor provide you a lump sum proposal for a duration undefined,
Right.
and a scope undefined for those general conditions, unlike a typical plans and spec type project. So the negotiated support services breakdown we provide for you follows the matrix for the services that we see necessary to support the job. They are not lump sum. It's really it's a budget we provide, we
On a
burn
unit
again.
price T&M
I think I looked at this as on kind of an average basis. I was kind of curious. It's run about, to the GMPs we put forth to date, it's about 23%. Right now, we're running at about 18%. On build cost, we're running at about 18%. So that's a good trend. I think that trend will probably stay about the same because we've had some big expenditures up front to get the tower crane installed, get the site established. And now it's kind of it should be a slower burn as we move forward. So that's negotiated support services, okay, for the GCCM. Take out any presumption that I'm doing any self-performed work at that point in time, right? The last element you're looking there is Hoffman Structures, who is doing the self-performed work in behalf of Hoffman under the heavy civil. They have general conditions expenses that's part of their work. So troweling machines, they have a pickup for their general foreman. They would have some safety expense. Now, we, in negotiating those general conditions expenses with Hoffman Structures, and we'd actually negotiate with our own entity, we've said, hey, for these elements, for instance, safety rails and ladders to access your work, we're going to do that as part of our negotiated support services, right? Saves the 8% fee, gets it more economically done, and supports them where they don't have to staff that. Some other things like first aid stations, I think we've pulled those back. You guys don't do first aid, we'll do the first aid for you. Surveying, we'll provide the surveying for you, you don't carry it in your number. So that's why you're seeing 3 levels of breakdown. You've got our specified GCs allocated by GMP. You've got the negotiated support services for the GCCM contract as defined by the matrix. And lastly, that self-perform entity has general conditions expenses as part of their work. The only other way you could do that is roll that into their units, which would then just cause additional question about are the units right. So,
No, and I didn't go into the units. I don't know the project in detail. You know, we're relying on KBA to do that side of the check for us, obviously. And their letter points out that they did verify labor, materials, the timeline, reasonability of this stuff. You know, they're involved in the plans to a much greater extent. Probably, well, I'm not going to say I don't know this. They're involved in the plans to a substantial extent, as you guys are. We have to have them there for that, for the backup, for our staff in there. And so, you know, I have no comment on the unit prices and the quantities and stuff like that. I obviously don't know that part of the job. I look at things in here as we had this meeting this morning, and I look at the timeline that's laid out on this, and it's like a 6-month timeline. KBA is saying it's 7 months, and it's, you know, 7 months is fine, but they're mixed in with this, which I didn't understand is why we have some items in here for 15 months on this schedule.
okay, on my NSS breakdown, so we have these overlaps that occur between the GMPs.
I want to abbreviate this thing and move it along.
Yeah, sure.
Joe really explained that
Okay.
to me at the meeting this morning,
Okay.
how we have these overlaps in here for negotiated services versus the incremental GMPs. And that does make sense. But when I got a copy of this and I'm looking
Didn't
at it,
explain that.
I'm going,
Yeah, you needed a decoder ring.
you know, I trust but I verify. Okay. And so when I go through this, I'm looking for the soft spots. You know, there are a lot of soft spots in GCCM. You have to, because you're going through this design phase anticipating where you're going, because you got allowances in here. And the other thing I do understand, your 4.2% and the 2 and for the insurance and bond and stuff like that, and the 8%. So, you know, that kind of nets out at about 10% on this when you take out bonds and insurance on that. The bottom line for us as council members, we'll look at this and go, there's $11.5 million that we're going to be asked to approve.
Yeah.
I mean, each one of us have to say, yeah, we're going to say to our constituents, our community, yep, we understand this, we're gonna authorize $11 million. That's why I'm really kind of real nitpicky about this kind of stuff, because I really like to know in depth a little more about the numbers and why we're voting on something. But as I go through this thing, and you get down to that 11.5 million that we're getting to, that is not necessarily what we are going to spend on this. It's the GMP, the guaranteed maximum, but we have allowance items in here. You don't deserve a fee on things that we don't spend money on. If we don't use the risk contingencies in here, you don't get your fee out of that.
And you don't pay them.
And, okay, and I understand that. What I'm looking for eventually from staff is a reconciliation that says, this is the major part of this project that has been contracted, $37 million. This is where we are right now that we have spent. Based on what the GMP was, and as we step this cost down, because I'm hearing that we are staying in line with that or less, and I want to see what that margin is that we are putting on the side that says, okay, we haven't spent this money that's in our contingency, and we have reduced the cost of this project by X dollars because of certain decisions. I really like to know what that forecast is as we are getting very deep into this thing, because the surface number is big, but we're not seeing the benefit of GCCM right now. The public is not getting the benefit of seeing those numbers. We have to hang on to them till the end. I get that, but as from an accounting standpoint, I like to see how we are performing in this GCCM process.
Right. And we're spending a lot of time doing that now, trying to understand how we are progressing against the GMPs we've laid out in front of you. So,
and that's where we're going with this.
Yes. And to give credit on the self-form, we save on the self-form concrete work. We save money in two areas. One is overall labor productivity and our ability to shorten the schedule. We have 10 months in there, so we can, every month we add is a lot of money to us. And right now, within our plan, we have a plan where we're going. Within our plan production, we're at 115% of plan and 113% of costs. So our costs are running low, and we're ahead of schedule.
Yeah, see, I want to see that quantitatively.
Yeah.
And I understand the verbal.
Yeah.
But I want to see the numbers.
Yeah.
And I recognize that they may even kind of float back and forth a little bit as we continue to go through this project. There's still risk involved.
And also how we attack the problem. But I have to give Brian here credit. He's a bulldog at getting this thing done. He's having a great time giving free rein to do it fast, and you can't sacrifice quality. We're not going to save a week to spend 3 months fixing something. But I feel very, I feel very comfortable with our self-perform methodology. I think in the long run, like you say, there's a lot of knowns there. It gives us the ability to attack things, and the benefits to the project in a month saved during the concrete has a rippling effect in the whole project. And Brian, I agree with you on that. And so that's the huge benefit we're seeing with this.
Well, in addition to picking this thing apart, I do go out there at that site from time to time, and even though I don't know quantities and details exactly what's going on, or not even remotely what's going on individual segments of that thing, the appearance of that project is a highly well-organized operation. It's a clean site, which is important, always have been important to me, and just the rhythm of the site and the sequence of things going on, it's pretty impressive. I think anybody with any reasonable amount of construction background would recognize that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Almer. Thank you for in-depth view and questions on the general conditions that help us in the city council understand better whether it's itemized.
Poor staff has to listen to me. Or they don't.
Thank you.
They have to put up with it.
Question? More questions, discussion? If not, thank you, Mr. Stoll.
I'm not leaving you just yet.
Not quite.
I'm up next.
You're then the next one too, on ERCI Amendment Number 7 for the clean water facility.
And believe it or not, I don't have a presentation for this one. I just took down some notes. This contract amendment is coming forward on September 6th as well. So you'll see in the packet the agenda bill and supporting documentation. Actually, this is going to be one of those agenda packets that they go, oh man, Joe is at it again. It's probably going to be 400 or 500 pages, because you know how we do, we put all the amendments from the previous contracts in there. So we have Hoffman, we're on, GMP 8, so all the previous GMPs will be in there along with the original contract. And the original contract's like 100 pages by itself. And then with ERCI, this is our 7th amendment with them that dates back to before we even selected Hoffman. This is when we were doing early site investigation. So that was my little side note, but I'm sorry ahead of time for the size of the packet. If you're one of those that prints them out, then bring your hand truck with you. So if you remember, we entered into a memorandum of agreement with the tribes, ecology, Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, and the EPA, and that was a requirement kind of built out of our SRF funding, and it's worked out really well for us. It sets the groundwork for how communications happen and the basic protocols should we encounter cultural resources or human remains. And it's part and parcel to what we need to do. So the previous amendment with ERCI was intended to get us through the early site excavation, which was just that first 7 feet of excavation work. We've been able to, they've been very conservative, and even with finding human remains on the project, we were able to stretch that until now. So I think they've done a wonderful job of managing their budget, but it's time. We're getting ready for the next big phases of work, which includes, as I mentioned before, the outfall connection that goes through. There's some intact and some disturbed midden that we have to go through, so that's going to be a critical area, and demolition of the existing plant. And without going into too much detail, that is an area of concern that we need to pay attention to, our cultural resource-wise. So in Amendment 7, is the intent of it is to get us through the end of the project, less any improvements to the park, because we don't know what those are yet. So it's kind of hard for her to give us a proposal for that. There's a base fee of about $175,000, and then there's a contingency of another $77,000, and that contingency, we're going to lump it all together in the award, but that contingency will only be released if we encounter intact midden or human remains. And in order to keep the project moving at the brisk pace we all would like it to, I'd like to have that contingency in there and available if we should need it. And the reason why we're bringing this forward on September 6th is because we actually need her out there as soon as the 12th to start doing monitoring on the outfall work in City Beach Street. So it's we've kind of pushed it as far as we can. We can't really push it any further. So you'll be seeing an agenda bill coming through, and it'll have the detail of her scope of work and a breakdown of the costs. But I just wanted to give you a quick heads up as to where that was headed.
Thank you, Mr. Stoll. Any question? Comments? Ms. Heisen?
Since we're keeping Kelly on board for this, what role does Gideon play?
He is.
He
He actually
monitoring
plays
something else, or?
Well, first off, it's more than one person can manage. So, if, say for example, he gets sick, he can't stop a project of this magnitude because one person's sick. So,
You guys aren't allowed to get sick, so.
well, right, and you know, Gideon keeps himself pretty busy with other things. Like today, he was out monitoring some work with the storm drain crew, some ditch cleaning work. He's actually been helping ERCI catalog items from Pioneer Way in preparation for submittal to the Burke Museum. So he has plenty of duties that are keeping him busy. He does oversee and keep an eye on what's going on. He regularly comes to the construction meetings, and he's become my right hand when it comes to archaeology. Used to be I didn't have anybody to lean on but Kelly, but now I have Gideon as well. So he's been a great help.
So is Kelly's work limited to anything related to the clean water facility period?
Yes.
Okay.
We're not using, if I'm understanding your question correctly, for a while we were using her for on-call archaeology, like if we needed to put in a street sign, fix a sprinkler head, things like that. We're not using her for that anymore. That contract is expired. That's what Gideon does now.
Good, thank you, Ms. Eisen. Any further discussion, question? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Stoller. You're in the next one too?
Yeah, I'm not. So,
This is the Corolla Engineering Amendment number 15 for the clean water facility.
yeah, this is a pretty straightforward one. We've been working with Corolla for a long time. We intended in the last amendment to include this, but it was in, it was out, and then eventually it was out. I'm not sure, but long story short is we have a room set aside for an interpretive center, and we're looking to them, specifically MWA architects and their support, to develop that interpretive center. What are the goals and purpose and objectives of the center? We have a lot of permit requirements from a lot of our different utilities for public outreach. We have a staff archaeologist, and it'd be nice to communicate some of the things that he does. They're everything from recycling to conservation, water conservation. So we need to work, we're going to work with them to develop what components that we'd like to have in the interpretive center. Then they're going to develop a plan and recommend what kind of media we might like to use. Is it hands-on? Is it signs? Is it are there technology components, touchscreens, things like that? What do we want to see in the interpretive center, and what would best suit our budget and our needs? And ultimately develop a plan for the implementation of that. And it doesn't include the actual construction of any of the exhibits, but it is the design and everything to implement them. And that's going to come through at about $40,000 is what the consultant fee would be for that. And that's managed through Corolla, but it's their architect and that's helping us with that.
That's it. Thank you.
Short
Mr.
story
Stoller.
that time.
And you mentioned the cost.
Yes, $40,000 is the consultant fee for that.
Any question, discussion from the council? Mr. Amber?
This is quite a small amount compared to the overall scope of Corolla's, but I am kind of curious why we're running even such a small item through Corolla and paying Corolla a fee for passing this on to the architect. And it just seems like another layer of people to go through when this is really a design concept and not construction drawings.
I think the relative markup on it is minimal compared to the management of the contracts themselves. I'd rather have Corolla manage it than have to manage a small one, and then have to divide up with MWA how much was spent on the development of the interpretive center versus development of the admin and maintenance building and architecture for the treatment plant. Plus, it's part and parcel of that facility. It needs to be incorporated into it. So if there's needs for electrical outlets or certain screening for the windows or window placement or different things like that, then it would be,
The in-house coordination is right.
it just makes sense to me.
No further question, comment? Thank you very much. So,
Thank you.
And then we go to the final item, the 2017 Whidbey Island Marathon Race Director update from Dr. Merriman.
This is just a quick update on where we're at with the selection of the next race director for the Whidbey Island Marathon. As you know, we sent out an RFP a few weeks back looking for proposals from different organizations to manage the marathon for us. And the discussion we had at that workshop was change it to a different business model. Rather than having the city heavily involved with staffing and manning a lot of the components of the marathon, we went to these different applicants and asked them to provide us a proposal where they would manage a significant amount of the marathon and let us know what the cost factors are and everything in that. So we had 5 different responding groups come and send in proposals to us. And the week of August 12th, we had a team of staff that has worked with the marathon before interview each of those groups and listen to their proposals. Those proposals are now complete, and we are going through and compiling and tabulating all of our rating scores. We rated on a lot of different information that was provided to us. Items that we were interested in knowing is what is the depth of their organization? Is it one person, or is it one person managing it and they have a lot of staff that they delegate things to? There's efficiencies in that. What is their demonstrated experience in running a number of similar events, different marathons, different type of activities like that? Did we think they had the ability to perform all functions? Things from even collecting traffic cones at the end of the event, picking up signs, different things like that. And then importantly, we wanted to know their concepts on marketing and promoting the event and how they recruit donors and how they recruit volunteers and manage them. So all 5 groups gave their proposals on that, and we actually have some rating sheets we came up with to use, and we'll have those all finished up this week. The next step we'll do is we'll come up with who we think would best meet the criteria we have to be our race director. And the team will submit that to the mayor for his review and approval. And we'll bring that forward on September 6th for council's action on that. So that's all that I have. I can entertain any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Merriman. Ms. Heisen.
Will the team be submitting more than one name, or is the plan to pick one person or entity to submit to the mayor?
We'll pick one. We have the scores from all 5, and we'll give that to the mayor along with a recommendation of who we feel in that group would be best.
Any further questions? Thank you, Dr. Merriman. Okay, that concludes our workshop. Do we need to make a motion to adjourn for the special meeting?
You can always take the motion.
Can I ask one question on this?
Sure.
I gave you a note. I heard, Joe, you said we have a workshop on the 26th. We've had emails on the 27th. I don't know that a date has been established for that workshop.
Yes, we have received a email from Anna, the city clerk, about September.
Yeah, I meant to say the week of the 26th.
Okay.
Yeah, we originally thought we could do it on the regularly scheduled workshop on the 28th, but it's getting pretty full. And rather than talk about treatment plant and then budget stuff, we thought we'd give you a little bit of a break.
What, August 28th?
September.
September 28th. That's what I need to get in there.
So we have a couple different meetings that we're trying to get nailed down. I'll be calling council members this next week to work with everybody on checking their calendars and see if we can get that set up.
Thank you. Precisely.
Speaking of, I'll be out of town for the September 6th meeting. I won't be here, so I'll send an email to Dan and CC you just so it's official. I just want to let you guys know.
Any other issues, emerging issues? And that concludes our meeting and workshop this afternoon. Thank you everyone for participating.
Thanks, Dan.